Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. So today we are here to discuss another chapter, that is heredity. So you must have heard such statements in your family like you are very similar to your mother, or your eyes are just similar to your father, or you are as tall as your father is. So what's the reason behind such statements? So all these reasons we are going to study in this chapter. So let's begin. So we know that reproduction is of two types, that is sexual and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves two parents, one male and female parent. But in asexual reproduction, only one parent is required. And in plants, we don't use this term asexual reproduction, we use the term vegetative propagation. So, what about variation? It is the main point regarding both the types of reproduction, that variation occurs in both the types of reproduction. But the variation is very less in case of the asexual reproduction, because the progeny or the offspring are exactly the carbon copies of their parents. So sometimes in some cases we can call them as clones, because they are genetically as well as phenotypically identical to their parents. But in case of sexual reproduction, the offspring are not exactly the carbon copy of their parents. There is a minor difference, so that leads to variation. And even in case of some asexual organisms, a little bit of difference is established. So variation occurs because of some inaccuracies during the copying of DNA. Accumulation of variation during reproduction. So variation is important, which is done in the sexual reproduction, which is more in the quantity in case of the sexual reproduction, but variation is very less in case of the asexual reproduction, but still it happens. So variation is important as it leads to evolution of species. Evolution means the species or the newly generated species in the environment keeps on reproducing. So that leads to evolution or changes among the species. This variation or evolution leads to the survival of the species or organisms. So according to the survival theory of fittest given by Darwin, the species which show more number of variations, which happens in case of sexual reproduction the more, in that case, or those species are very resistant to the environmental changes, because these species, because of they are having variations, a number of variations are there. It means the species is well adapted to the environment, or that offspring or the species with a greater number of variation is ready to adapt changes in the environment. So that species will survive in the environment the most. So we have seen that variations in sexual reproduction is more. It leads to evolution. Variation leads to evolution. Now, if we see or if we talk about the variation in asexual reproduction, so for example, this is a bacterium and it divides by binary fission. Here binary means divide into two daughter cells and fission means to divide. So this bacterium divides into two daughter individuals or two bacteria. So the bacterium is the singular word and bacteria is the plural word. So because of the binary fission in this bacterium, two bacteria are formed. Again, from this bacterium, two bacteria are formed, and here also again The chain continues like this. So these 4 bacteria are quite identical to each other but still possess some differences. And those differences which possessed by these bacteria enable them to survive in the environment. For example, during the heat wave. So this is the harsh condition in which not all organisms can survive. So for example, out of these bacteria, so during the heat wave, those bacteria can survive which exhibit the genes of variation, in which variation is the most, because that variation leads to the changes in the bacterium or bacteria that enable them to survive in the environment. So this is again, we have just talked about the survival of the fittest. Now, the variation set the basis of evolution. It involves the selection of variants by environmental factors, which we have just discussed about the heat wave.